Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and June is over, which means half the year is gone. I'm fine, don't worry about it. Alright, so we are officially 6 months into the year 2023, which is absolutely bonkers, and I'm sure everybody else is feeling it too. But I had a really good month of reading in June, and I'm very excited to talk about it. I read 8 novels and 1 graphic novel, and had several 5-star reads this month, which was super exciting. I feel like I just had such a good month coming off of May when things were a little bit quieter and I had a little bit of a reading slump. Sorry, I think there's a cat hair in my nose. Things in May were a little stressful, and we just kind of took a little bit of a step back, and I didn't read quite as much, and I needed that time to kind of reset. And that was really great. So coming back into June, I felt so much more recharged and excited to get into the books that I had on my TBR. And I feel pretty darn good about everything I was able to get through. Let's jump into the books that I read in June. Now, first of all, I started the month with something really easy, and I wanted to read something that I knew I could just blow right through, and obviously this is a tiny book. So this is That Was Then, This Is Now by S.E. Hinton, who is the author of The Outsiders, which is a book that made it into my top 10 easily of last year. It was incredible. I've always loved the film, and the book did not disappoint. It was an incredible book. So naturally, I was curious to see what S.E. Hinton's other work was like. And I know she's written, I think, a few other books besides this one and The Outsiders, and I do intend to check those out as well. Rumblefish might be the next one I pick up, not sure yet. But this one follows the story of 2 boys who are best friends, adopted brothers, and I'm not going to spoil too much about the plot because this just kind of has to be experienced. And even though it's been almost a month now, has been a month now since I read it, I'm still percolating on all of the emotions and things that this book elicited in me while I was reading it. It's a story of coming of age, obviously, but also relationships and how they change over time, whether for positive or negative. Once again, S.E. Hinton knows how to really punch you in the feels because she did it again. I did not love it as much as I loved The Outsiders, but I do think that those were some pretty big shoes to fill, in fairness, so I'm not holding anything against it. Yeah, and in general terms, I'm just very glad that I read this, and I think it's definitely worth the read for anyone who's a fan of The Outsiders. Next up, I finally got to the first book in a series that I have had kind of looming at the edges of my TBR for quite a long time. I have several close friends in the community who really love this series, and I was really coming into it knowing absolutely nothing. I had no idea how I was going to react to it. Nothing. I knew that people either seemed to really love it or it just really didn't jive with them, but I haven't heard as many people talking about it as I would have thought, which kind of surprised me. So I started The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham, and the first book I read from it was A Shadow in Summer, which is book 1, and I was honestly blown away by how much I loved that book. For me, the tone of Long Price Quartet and the general style of it, it is very character deep perspective, internal. It is so incredibly intimate in the sense that you are just so involved in these characters' perspectives in this world that feels very much like its own place. It doesn't feel like a little offshoot of our own world. I can definitely tell that there are influences from different parts of our own world, but this world building just feels so its own, which is something that I really love. And the only other time that I've gotten the same level of that kind of world building immersion is when I read Malazan Book of the Fallen 10 years ago. And so to have a rekindling of that experience was beautiful. It made me so happy, and I absolutely fell in love with this book. I was kind of surprised, to be honest, because a lot of people told me to expect that the first and second book might take a little bit for me to get into, that I might have a hard time connecting with the characters. And I didn't, and that really surprised me. And as I go into books 3 and 4 here in July, if books 1 and 2 were supposed to be the slow ones that I had to like work to get through, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to experience in books 3 and 4, because I really, really loved the beginning of this quartet. Absolutely loved it. The characters, he's saying so much, and everything just felt so deep and profound and interesting, and there were slow moments for sure, and it wasn't that, but I didn't mind them, and that to me is a sign of an author that I can really respect, because I do have a harder time sometimes with slow burn stories, and the fact that Daniel Abraham managed to write the type of story that he did and keep me so incredibly embedded into those characters and what was going on blew my mind. I don't want to say too much more about my experience with it, and I'm going to talk about Betrayal in Winter in a few minutes as well, but I want to do a dedicated review for this series when I'm done, and I'm giving myself some time to finish the quartet before I have to try and force some kind of articulate something out of my brain to explain how incredibly blown away I have been by this series so far. After Shadow and Summer, I knew I needed to take a break from fantasy, because I really try not to follow up any massively mind-blowing 5-star reads with a book in the same genre, because I feel like it's kind of unfair to the next book, and I need to give myself a little bit of space so that I can allow the next read to just be its own experience. So I picked up a memoir called What is a Girl Worth by Rachel Denhollander. This is a book that was written by the first woman to publicly come forward as a victim of Larry Nassar, who was the USAG gymnastics doctor. He was the doctor for so many young athletes, and if you followed the news at all when this was going on, it came to light that he had been manipulating, grooming, and abusing countless young athletes, it was a horrible, horrible situation and a horrible, horrible story. I ended up watching the recordings of the entire trial. I watched all of the victim statements by all of the people that came forward to address Larry during the trial, and all of the incredibly brave survivors that had the courage to come out and give a voice to what all of these young people had experienced with him. The first half of the book really doesn't go into the case that much. The first half of the book really focuses more on her growing up and her experience in gymnastics, her experiences with Larry Nassar, and how that then affected her in her early adult life, her marriage, and all of those kinds of things. So it's very much personal in the first half of the book. Once she hits about the halfway mark, she gives so much incredibly well articulated information about the legal system and the hoops and hurdles that the survivors had to go through in order to even make this trial happen. The second half of this book has so much well articulated information about what a legal proceeding like this actually looks like and takes. And I was really amazed at how easily I understood everything, and the way that she was laying it out in a very easy to understand format was really impressive to me. So yeah, definitely if you're interested in learning more about that particular case or the legal system of victims and survivors of sexual violence have to go through for things like this, it's definitely very eye-opening and very well written. Yeah, excellent read, and it was a good follow-up to the 5-star fantasy read. I did my sample Spiffbo vlog, collaboration with my friend Andrew's Wizardly Reads. You'll find him down in the description box below. And we had a great time sampling 6 first chapters of self-published fantasy blog off competition entrants from this year. Again, if you want to know more about what that is, go check out my introduction video to Spiffbo. One of the books that caught my attention very quickly was The Way of Renegades by Steve D. Wall. Now, I do have an author interview for this book, and we had such a great conversation, so please definitely check that out because Steve had a lot of really cool insights into where this book came from and his process and all sorts of fun things. So, Way of Renegades is kind of hard to put in a nutshell. It's 3 POVs with a 4th that gets added later, and it's a group of characters who are kind of in the heart of a world that is right on the cusp of major technological advances. We have flintlock, we have firearms, the guns are starting to kind of be upgraded now to something with more firepower that can be fired faster. And yet the world is under threat by an ancient sorcery. The fact that he wrote a story wherein flintlock versus ancient sorcery is a very close, tense kind of battle, I really, really liked. There's also a bard POV in this book, which was initially something that drew me to it. I find that very fascinating, and I like when bards are brought into the story a little bit more. And Steve ends up going in and creating a magic system that in one aspect involves music in a very, very cool way. So anyways, there were lots of things to enjoy about this book. I gave it 4 stars. I had a great time reading it, and I definitely think it's a strong contender for this year's self-published fantasy blog-off competition. Yeah, so definitely if you are looking for a new indie read to check out, this is a great option. After Way of Renegades, I grabbed The Last Ronin by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. This is... I'm going to try and put this in a nutshell. So I have been a massive fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles since I was in early high school, junior high, maybe even a little bit younger. And it's one of my favorite cartoon series of all time. This follows a post-apocalyptic future storyline where only one of the 4 Turtle brothers is still living, and he is on a last-ditch effort to get revenge and to finish the feud that has been waging for all of these years. And I'm not going to spoil it by saying which turtle is still alive because you'll have to read it and find out. This is a storyline that exists in pretty much every era of TMNT, and I've always loved it. The seasons that I grew up with that really loving were the ones that came out in the early 2000s. That is my favorite version of the Turtles. And there was a episode in season 3 and somewhere in the 20s that was incredibly influential to me as a young writer that followed basically a similar storyline to this. And getting to see it in graphic novel form, the artwork is absolutely stunning. You can see that this is an absolutely beautiful book, and I absolutely loved getting a chance to read another version of a storyline that has been one of my favorites for a very long time. I really enjoyed reading this, and for anybody who's a fan of TMNT, cannot recommend reading this highly enough. Next up, we're going to go back to the Long Price Quartet, and I'm not going to belabor this too much by saying things that I have already said, but I read A Betrayal in Winter, which is book 2 of the Long Price Quartet. When I started reading book 2, I was worried that it wasn't going to live up to my experience in book 1, and it was a little bit slower to get going, especially in, I would say, the early middle to the middle. It managed to give just the same incredibly deep, profound, mind-blowing, challenging everything I think about when I'm writing experience that book 1 did, and I was so excited by that. I was so excited. I cannot tell you guys how excited I am about this series, which shocks me because the style that it's written in is not something that I would say I naturally gravitate to, but I think as I'm getting a little bit older and as I am reading a wider variety of fantasy, I am appreciating stories like this so much more, and that's something that I am really grateful to the genre for, is just the constant ability to expand and grow and learn from different styles of stories. And I can't say enough good things about this series, you guys. I fully anticipate being absolutely mind blown by books 3 and 4 here in July. I can't wait. I'm guessing I'm probably going to binge right through them. And that's totally fine with me. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to finish this series. The next book that I read in June was The Book of Zog by Alec Hudson. Now, Alec Hudson is also the author of The Umbral Storm, which was a finalist in SPIFBO 8 last year. The Book of Zog follows a main character who is an eldritch horror who is born somewhere in the universe and meanders his way to an Earth. And it's kind of an eclectic group of styles within the story. It's got the eldritch horror aspect, but it's also cozy and wholesome in some areas. Like this eldritch horror builds himself a cave and learns how to do, you know, stonemasonry and all sorts of stuff like that, and starts learning about the people on the planet and appreciating their artistic sense of style and all of these things, and ends up meeting a couple of other cosmic beings, and then they have to save the universe. And that's kind of the general gist of the story. It was very much outside my comfort zone to read because I would never have gravitated toward it normally, but I've been wanting to read a bunch of the SPIFBO contestants, and I don't know, I just really appreciated the wholesome atmosphere of this story, and I would not have guessed that an eldritch horror, cozy, cosmic fantasy novel, I don't know if that's a fair thing to call it, but that's kind of how I would categorize it, would have been something that I really enjoyed. But I did. There were definitely some things that I felt were a little bit slow moving, or maybe could have been fleshed out a little bit more, or motives, etc. But overall, this was a really fun read, and I had a good time with it. Next up is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third and final installment in the First Law trilogy, which was his debut fantasy work. And for my full thoughts on this book, you can watch the Last Argument of Kings vlog that I just recently posted and watch all of my reactions in real time, because I have a lot more information in that one. I gave this a 3-star, and like star ratings or whatever, but I gave this a 3-star on Goodreads. I really had a hard time with this book. I love Joe Abercrombie's writing. I absolutely love so many things about this trilogy. I gave book 2 5 stars. The ending really didn't work for me for a lot of different reasons. Overall, I think what it came down to was just there was a removal of agency from a lot of the plot and characters in this book that really bothered me, and also the number of plot conveniences that showed up in this book 3 was just so disappointing, and that really lowered my enjoyment of it. I still think that Joe Abercrombie is a brilliant writer. His characterization and the way that he draws you in to the dialogue and the characters is just brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of his work in the future. I have heard a lot of really positive things about the latest trilogy, the Age of Madness trilogy, and I do intend to get to that at some point, and I'm very excited. I feel very optimistic about it, because I enjoy Joe Abercrombie's writing very much enough to keep going. So that was my overall thought on the First Law and the ending of that. I was hoping I was going to enjoy it more, but I struggled. I really did. So for full thoughts, again, go watch the vlog. The final book I read this month was The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. I am so excited to talk to you guys about this book. I loved it. This is another SPIFBO 9 competitor, and Jacqueline has created a book here that the best way I can describe it very quickly to someone is a Howl's Moving Castle meets Oliver Twist. The main character, Inkwell Featherfield, is along the same lines as our Artful Dodger, the Locke Lamora, the Huckleberry Finn type of character. He is scampish and endearing, and there is a kind of a witch hunt going on in the beginning of this book for a small group of people who supposedly have done this horrible, awful thing years before the story starts. I really didn't know how I was going to feel about it in the very first few pages of this book, but as the story went on, There's so much wholesome found family aspect to this book, but the questions that are posed in this book about what's going to happen in the trilogy, I think it's a trilogy, really were fun and engaging. The magic system is really intriguing. I'm very excited about it. There are different kind of planes of reality, which is really cool. She's playing with a lot of things in this book that I found really interesting. And I blew through this book. I had such a great time reading it. So keep an eye out for my author interview coming out in a couple of days with the author. I'm very excited to chat with her. I'll put that up in the cards so you guys can put your notifications on, or if you're watching this after the fact, go check it out. But I'm very excited to talk to her about this. I loved it so much that I immediately went and bought the second book as a physical copy, because I can't wait to see what happens next. Now, as promised, I do want to share my DNFs with you guys if I have any during the month, and this month I did DNF another indie book, The Season of Kings by A.J. Retger. This one is a pretty short, grimdark fantasy that takes place with 3 different POVs telling us the story. The world is very dark, it's gritty, there is a prince taking over a throne, and there's a jaded warrior, and then there's a young girl, and those are our 3 POVs. What I struggled with in this book was everything felt very rushed to me, and I was having a really hard time latching onto the characters. The dialogue was not my favorite, and there was a lot of just rushed, chaotic plot that I was struggling to kind of catch up with. This one just was not a good fit for me, and I ended up DNFing it, I think, around the 60-page mark. So yeah, that was the one DNF that I had this month. And once again, I want to reiterate, when I share these DNFs with everybody, just because it doesn't work for me doesn't necessarily mean it won't work for somebody else. So if it sounds like something you would enjoy, definitely go check out the synopsis on Goodreads or Amazon and give the book a shot. Again, overall, a great month. We had another imposter syndrome episode, and I was joined by Steven Erickson and my friend Andrew D. Meredith, and we had an amazing conversation about world building in fantasy and what that means and how we go about that and how to keep it all straight and all that sorts of stuff. And it was a great conversation. We had a great time. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to picking back up with Imposter Syndrome in August. We are taking the month of July off because my personal life is crazy with vacations and summer and things, so I just didn't want to force another episode into this month. So we will be back in August, and I will let you guys know what topic and what guests we will be showcasing then. But yeah, I hope you guys all had a fantastic month of reads. June was a great month for me. I had a really good time with it, and I hope that you all had a good time too. I hope you're having a great week. I hope you're reading 5-star reads, and I'll see you in the next video.